When it comes to early takes on arcade classics for home micros, at least those unofficial ones, I find they tend to come in one of two forms. The first is the type which tries to replicate the original game as best it can, at least given the talent of the coders involved and the capabilities of what platform they're targeting. But the second type? I reckon those are the more interesting ones, because they try to take the mechanics and concepts of the original arcade game they're inspired by, but build upon them to bring something new to the table. Which is exactly where Synapse Software Survivor just happens to sit, taking the core of Namco's Bosconian and adds a bit of that home computer style spin to it. Survivor originally saw release to the Atari 8-bit computer line in 1983, with its low conversion to the Commodore 64 happening later that year. So, how about that aforementioned home computer spin? Well, you can see that right from the core, its objective is really about being the lone survivor of a devastating ambush, and you're now tasked with taking the fight to the Xenoglyphs, locating and destroying 4 of their heavily defended spaceports. The first line of defense for these comes in the form of a vast outer wall. They may span a large area, but breaching them I found was more a distraction than an actual challenge. They're pretty easy to blast through, 2 shots takes a tile out. The challenge though truly comes into play with the forces designed to get in your way. These fighters, trackers, and launchers are relentless, chasing you down in various ways, whether they're circling about you as you move about or trying to chase you down directly. And that's just on the easiest of the game's difficulty levels. Learning the tricks of the trade to outsmart them, especially with how they vary their attack passes over time, I found to be crucial for surviving the challenges Survivor throws your way. But what about the forts themselves? It's honestly quite straightforward to take them out. Just locate all the gun batteries and blast them. When they've all been taken care of, you'll be rewarded with a sound and light show as the fort disintegrates, a sign of a job well done. I love how each fort offers a distinctive layout, with the ones you encounter further in the game slowly ramping up in complexity for both the layout and the intensity of their defensive batteries. What's also handy is you are free to tackle them any order you want. And this is especially handy because each one you take out will reward you with extra lives and bombs. That's right, I said bombs. Your trusty Star Wedge fighter carries a supply of them to go with your cannons, which default to firing ahead and behind you. Though these cannons are good for handling everything you're going to face, the bombs have a different purpose. They're more of a last-ditch weapon for clearing out any attackers who might get a little too close for comfort. In the long term, this sets up the importance of mastering how you handle that Star Wedge fighter, both in its navigational controls, but also with understanding how best to line up and take out gun batteries without being blasted into a mess of pixels. As a solo experience, Survivor is quite a solid challenge, especially as you ramp the difficulty level up. The thing is, that's not really why I find it to be an interesting game. Instead, that's from its multiplayer mode. Where other games of the time tended to be about alternating play between players in a game like that, Survivor goes for something quite different: cooperative play. Now, for those who are interested in the Atari version, Survivor was published during the time of the original 400 and 800 models. And you know what that means? You could bring up to 3 friends along for the ride, each handling a separate role. Players 2 and 3 will control one of your ship's guns, and the 4th, they handle your ship's propulsion. It's a bit of a shame I actually couldn't explore this, My main Atari, of course, is a 130XE, which only has 2 joystick ports. Alas. Of course, the Commodore 64 version is also limited to 2 players as well. Again, it's only got 2 joystick ports on it. And all of this kind of made me ponder, as someone who plays these games solo, could I connect up 2 joysticks to each machine, put Survivor into 2-player mode, and treat it like a proto twin-stick shooter? So, I did just that. Firing up both the Atari and Commodore 64 versions to see how it played in that mode. And you know what? It worked. Even though there are a few little differences between the 2 micros. With the Atari version, the first thing I had to do was hit the A key once I got into the game to enable its automatic firing feature. This feature basically lets you constantly fire without having to hold the button down. So, in the case of this 2 player mode, the second player's joystick let you do that. The downside is that because it was designed around you holding down the fire button to fire without turning that on, you've still got to reach over to the keyboard to use your bombs. And depending on how things are set up, it might be a little clumsier than it's worth. At least it was in my case with how I was playing. So what about the Commodore 64 version? Here, the results were impressive. Seriously impressive. And it's all because you didn't need to activate automatic firing. Right from the outset, it's how the game functions in 2-player mode. You can move the joystick about and fire at will with your second controller. What it also means though is that if you press the fire button on the second player's controller, you can fire bombs. Playing Survivor on the Commodore 64 in this way feels transformative, because by letting you fire independently of your movement, the gameplay feels far more fluid, because there's less need to stop about to align shots to take out some of those trickily positioned batteries. It almost brings a performative element to the action, because strafing each fort is kind of more exciting than just lining up to take the shot and stop. And it helps the gameplay feel more unique compared with other home computer shooters released around this time. And when you look at the Commodore 64 version, which does run at a bit of a faster pace than the Atari original, you can see why I kind of prefer it over that Atari version. Though there is one thing I don't like, and that's the size of the sprite for your Star Edge fighter. It makes navigating the tighter corridors in some of the forts require pixel precise accuracy, and that can kind of take you out of the zone whilst you're lining up to clear those gaps. On the Atari version, the slightly smaller sprite you'll use helps quite a lot here. Sure, you still have to be deliberate with how you fly it about, but the extra couple of pixels leeway you get, it helps from slowing the action to a crawl when you're focusing on those tighter bits to get the last couple of batteries sorted. But sadly, there is an issue with the Atari version. It's not game-breaking, but it does limit my enjoyment of it. What happens when you complete a level? Once that last fort is blown up, that's it. You're taken right back to the title screen. There's no tabulating a bonus score. You don't even get a congratulations message. It's just nothing. Now, it is relatively minor, and with the general pace of the game, you can complete a round in several minutes, and not getting the reward of moving on to the next, where there's a greater challenge, feels like a bit of a letdown. Now, the Commodore 64 version actually has this happen. Once you destroy the last fort, you get a little bonus screen. It tabulates however many ships you've got left to give you some bonus points, and the game moves on to the next difficulty level. And what this means is that it gives you a reason to keep coming back. Like, can you get further on a new run than you did previously? Can you reach a higher level? Or perhaps, can you have a run where you beat your personal best score? Get those journals and write down your scores and come back later. For these sort of early arcade action inspired games, simple things like this are what keep me coming back. And as simple as this addition is for the Commodore 64 version, it really keeps me excited and lets me get revved up for that next zone of battle. And so, as a relatively early release for these systems, Survivor isn't the most in-depth game you're going to find, whether on the Atari or on the Commodore 64. But it's one I feel is absolutely worth checking out, particularly if you're open to something which doesn't just ape an arcade game, but it takes the concepts of one to build upon them in quite a unique way. And this applies even more if you can bring some friends along for the ride. Though if you can't, at least on the Commodore side of the fence, get a pair of joysticks, set it up for 2 players, and go with that faux twin-stick game mode. And I reckon you'll certainly have a bit of a blast. I'm certainly okay with the fact that Survivor doesn't have any long-term depth though, because I know I'm going to want to go back to it regardless, even if only to see, can I take out all those space forts on the hardest difficulty level? And with that, it's time to draw this one to a close, I think. So, there is nothing more for me to say than to thank you all very much for watching.